Good evening, everyone, and thanks so much for joining us as we move our 25-year-old author event series from the Free Library of Philadelphia to our new and, we hope, temporary home. My name is Andy Cahan, Director of Author Events. So before we begin tonight, I wanted to point out a couple of useful features on your screen. You'll notice there's a button below suggesting that you can buy a copy of our guest's new book. The button links to the IndieBound website, which will give you access to the online stores of independent booksellers nationwide. They need your support now more than ever, and so does the library. For that reason, I encourage you to make a contribution to keep our digital initiatives alive by clicking the link in the event description. Below, you'll also see the Ask a Question link, which you can use to ask a question, suggest a topic, or vote for other questions you'd like to favor. And you can do that by using the up and down arrows to the left of each of the questions. And lastly, note that you'll be able to see the authors on screen, but the authors and I can't see you. So you can make faces and do whatever you like. We'll have to save that for our next event at the library. It's now my pleasure to welcome Emily St. John Mandel and Beth Kephart. One critic called The Glass Hotel the perfect novel for your survival bunker. In the book, Mandel tells a tale of a gargantuan Ponzi scheme, cryptic threats, and the clandestine landscapes that exist just below the veneer of ordinary life. Tonight, she'll be in conversation with Philadelphia's own Beth Kephart, the award-winning author of more than 25 books, including Going Over, Handling the Truth on the Writing of Memoir, and most recently, her new novel, The Great Upending. And away we go.
Well, Andy, thank you so much for having us here, for trusting us with this new technology.
My pleasure. I only wish the lighting was better in my office. It's like it's like a ghost story in here.
Absolutely beautiful. I was saying to Emily that she glows. She needs no light. She just glows.
You know, I had to wear a white shirt because the first event I did of this nature earlier in the week, I was wearing a black shirt at first, and I was like a floating head. So, you know, I'm getting the wardrobe together for this brave new world.
And here I am in all black except a little spot of red. So I'll learn from you for next time. All right. So that everybody out there knows, I'm going to be asking questions, but we're also going to have the great privilege of hearing Emily read. So embedded in my questions are some opportunities for her to read pages. She already knows the pages, so she's going to flip rapidly to them when we get to those places, but we're going to start. Readers and reviewers have described The Glass House in deservedly rapturous terms. If anyone hasn't read the New Yorker Review yet today, you must go to it. It's a brother and sister story, as a Ponzi scheme unravels to disastrous effect story, as a ghost story, and as a book in which, quote, the infinite possibilities available to a writer of fiction are explored. That was Ruth Franklin in The Atlantic. This book is all those things. It is so much more. And so, Emily, for my first question, I wanted to know, when you were crafting the book, how did you define it for yourself?
I have had so much trouble with that question, you know, really since I was crafting the book. You know, with my previous novel, Station 11, it was just so easy to kind of have an elevator pitch, so to speak, even for myself. Yeah. So that if anybody asked me what that book was about, I would be like, well, it's about a traveling Shakespearean theater company in a post-apocalyptic North America. You're like, done. That was all you needed. With this one, I still find myself kind of floundering around with description. I see it as a ghost story that's also about a Ponzi scheme and the fallout from white-collar crime. Also about corruption and responsibility. And there's this whole element about shipping. So yeah, trying to wrap that up into something elegant is obviously a task that's so far eluded me. Yeah, it's a very strange book, and I found it quite difficult to describe.
But a beautiful book, and I want to talk to you now about a little bit about the crafting of it. I have read a lot of interviews with you. I know it wasn't the easiest book to produce. There were some editorial questions. But here's a question for you. The longest there is, so bear with me. There are many characters in these pages. That half-brother and sister whose trajectories we follow from underprivileged circumstance to temporary, devastating fame and wealth. That crooked financier. the people whose lives in various ways collapse with his scheme, container ship executives and crew members. There are flash forwards and flashbacks, categories of flashes that might not even have a name yet. I worked on finding a name, but I couldn't find it. And yet to us readers, this book feels entirely organic, at ease within itself. The right scene following the right scene, a brilliantly conceived recurrence of images, themes, and obsessions, stories slowly knitting themselves together over time. The book, one gets a feeling, trusts itself, and its surprises are elegant. At what point during the writing and revising did it feel as if the book had yielded its secrets to you, and that you, as its creators, could approach its many parts with concentrated calm?
It's a great question. Not until the very final round of edits, honestly. So my process as a writer, I never write from an outline. And there are some obvious downsides to that. I think there's really something to be said for having a roadmap when you go into the territory. But there's a real possibility of surprise when you write without an outline. And I've always really valued that. So my process is I write without an outline for a year or so, at the end of which I have this spectacularly messy first draft. I mean, it's really a train wreck. And then for me, I really find the novel in the revisions. And with this novel, it took 5 years to write this thing, which for context is twice as long as it took to write Station 11. It was just this process of endless revisions. And then eventually I handed in the final draft, what I thought was the final draft to my editors. And to be clear, my editors are wonderful. They make my work so much better than it otherwise would be. The first round editorial notes, I think, could be summarized fairly as, could you please change absolutely everything? So, back to square one, restructure the book, change this, change that. I feel like the edits were so intense that I ended up writing the book about 3 times. I feel like there were 3 discrete versions of The Glass Hotel. And maybe because of that, I didn't really have much confidence in the book until really the very end. And it still seemed possible to me that I might release it and all the reviews might be terrible. I wouldn't have been that surprised somehow. So yeah, I would not say that I ever had a high degree of certainty in this book. Maybe really until the very end, the very last round of edits, where I kind of felt like I had something here. But yeah, there was such uncertainty throughout. Maybe partly because it was the book that followed Station 11, and there's a certain weight of expectation that one puts on oneself. So yeah, maybe that was part of it, just a sort of self-imposed pressure. But yeah, it was hard to write in summary.
So were the editorial remarks primarily? I mean, I talked about flash forwards and flashbacks and all the cuts and the ghosts and alternative realities that you so beautifully achieve, I think.
Thank you.
Were the editorial remarks about creating greater coherence? Were there other storylines that were left out? Were there characters that we no longer see? What was happening there?
It really came down to a problem of structure with this book. So one of the books that I love most in the world is Cloud Atlas by David Mitchell, which I'm sure a lot of your audience has read it. For anybody who hasn't, it's got this wonderful symmetrical structure that moves forward and then backward in time with a different perspective at each point. So if section A is set in, say, the 1650s, and section B is in the 1800s, and C is in 1950, you could map that book as A, B, C, D, C, B, A. There's this wonderful symmetry to it. So with my first draft that I submitted of the Glass Hotel, I used that structure. That is such a hard structure to pull off in terms of narrative tension. If you're forced by the structure of the book to return to the same point in time, toward the end, when, in the second half of a book, you really have to be ramping up the dramatic tension, for the final stretch. So yeah, it was largely a structural problem. So then once I solved that problem, then we started to get into problems around, well, what is the climax of the book? And what we were trying to do for a while was make the sort of climactic sort of beginning of the third act moment be the reveal of the Ponzi scheme, which is not actually a spoiler, by the way. If you read the jacket copy, you know it's a Ponzi scheme. But Vincent, the main character, doesn't know it's a Ponzi scheme. So trying to figure out a way to structure the book so that that reveal was as close to the end as possible. That was another... Am I still here? Can you see me? My camera just blinked out.
Yeah, I don't see you right now.
Oh,
but
there.
I do. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Right. Yeah. So I would say the notes largely had to do with the structure of the book, and coming up with a structure that worked dramatically was hugely challenging.
But isn't it now, in retrospect, you can say it because the reviews are so beautiful. I can say it. How much more exciting to be on a journey where you're creating something new and having to develop a structure that works, something that you define for yourself. And, and that's the glory of writing. 5 years it takes. You're sort of in that knot during it. But in retrospect, how beautiful that you stayed with the pieces and how they move.
Well, thank you. Thanks.
You said in a recent interview that many of your female characters erupt from personal, perhaps even autobiographical places. This is in many of your books. And so, of course, we have to wonder, is that true of Vincent? And can you tell us more about her, and maybe in sideways fashion more about
right.
Like Vincent?
Sure, absolutely. You know, it's funny. I don't think any of us as novelists set out to write avatars, so to speak. And I swear I didn't catch this pattern until an interviewer doing a profile of me who just read all of my books pointed out to me that there does tend to be a recurring female character who's somewhat undereducated, self-possessed, and widely read. And that kind of is me, I would have to say. I don't actually have a high school diploma. It's kind of a long, boring story. I went to school for contemporary dance.
It's not boring. I've read this story many times and I love it. So
well, thank you. No, yeah, I didn't mean to write myself into my books, and I didn't completely. You know, none of those characters are actually me. But I think that as fiction writers, we do inevitably draw from our own experiences and trying to create well-rounded characters. And, you know, although no character has ever been explicitly or clearly me, I have absolutely pulled from my experiences in creating, probably especially Vincent, and Miranda in Station 11 was the other obvious one. With Miranda, maybe it was a little bit more clear. You know, she's from the same tiny island off the west coast of British Columbia where I grew up. She has the same experience I did of moving to a big city at 18. When you're from a very small place where everybody knows you, and then you move to a major city, the anonymity can feel like freedom, you know, just being able to walk down the street, nobody knows anything about you. So I definitely gave that personal experience to Miranda. With Vincent, you know, she's not actually, I don't think she's as close to me as Miranda was. You know, there are definitely biographical similarities in the sense that, you know, she doesn't have academic degrees either. She is an artist, but her major problem in life, as I see it, is that she doesn't know what she wants to do with her life. She's talented, but not particularly ambitious. And that's not actually something I can relate to. You know, I have always been ambitious, which I think in our culture has negative connotations, but it doesn't have to. You know, I don't think that wanting to excel in your career in any way means that you're ever unkind to other people, you know, for example. Yeah, so I saw her as being very much lacking in direction, and that's not a problem that I've had. So, yeah, but, you know, it is a fair point. There are some similarities.
Did you ever dye your hair blue, for example?
I almost did. I didn't. No, I mean, you know, yeah.
Graffiti. Do you have a graffiti?
No graffiti. No, never in my life. Yeah, I was a really square teenager.
Square dancing teenager.
Yeah.
So we've talked a little bit about Vincent. Let's hear her voice.
Sure.
You're going to read the opening 2 pages for us. And when you finish these pages, you've written this book in an I, a choral we, and a third person. Mm-hmm. you do them all well. Let's hear this voice from you, and when we come out from that reading, whether there is a voice that you feel most close to as you write.
Okay, sure. So for context, for anybody who doesn't have a copy of the book in front of them, this is the first chapter, and it's told in fragments. So if I sound like I'm jumping around, it's that it's a series of paragraphs with a dash at the end. It really breaks off. All right, the chapter is called Vincent in the Ocean. Begin at the end, plummeting down the side of the ship in the storm's wild darkness, breath gone with the shock of falling, my camera flying away through the rain. Sweep me up. Words scrawled on a window when I was 13 years old. I stepped back and let the marker drop from my hand, and still I remember the exuberance of that moment, that feeling in my chest like light glinting on crushed glass. Have I risen to the surface? The cold is annihilating. The cold is all there is. A strange memory. Standing by the shore at Cayette when I was 13 years old, my brand new video camera cool and strange in my hands, filming the waves in 5-minute intervals. And as I'm filming, I hear my own voice whispering, I want to go home. I want to go home. I want to go home. Although where is home if not there? Where am I? Neither in nor out of the ocean. I can't feel the cold anymore, or actually anything. I am aware of a border, but I can't tell which side I'm on. And it seems I can move between memories, like walking from one room to the next. Welcome aboard, the third mate said, the first time I ever boarded the Neptune Cumberland. When I looked at him, something struck me, and I thought, you. I am out of time. I want to see my brother. I can hear him talking to me, and my memories of him are agitating. I concentrate very hard, and abruptly I'm standing on a narrow street, in the dark, in the rain, in a foreign city. A man is slumped in a doorway just across from me, and I haven't seen my brother in a decade, but I know that it's him. Paul looks up, and there's time to notice that he looks terrible, gaunt and undone. He sees me, but then the street blinks out. So that's chapter 1 of The Glass Hotel, a woman falling off the side of a ship.
And so beautiful on the page and so beautifully read.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. And so that's first person. The whole book is not in first person.
No, it's not. I do switch around a little bit. I find first person really hard to sustain. I came across what seemed to me to be good advice once. I think it was Jonathan Franzen who said, unless you have a really compelling first-person voice that you absolutely have to use, then go with third, which I think it makes sense for me personally. I find third person much easier. It's kind of my default. But yeah, in the book, although it is an ensemble piece, Vincent is very much at the heart of every storyline in the book. Yeah. And I liked the idea of beginning and ending with her. There's an intimacy to first person. Yeah. Also, if we're being honest here, it's not hard to sustain first person for 2 chapters, one at the beginning, one at the end. But then to your point, I do switch around a lot in the book. So I would say most of the rest of the book is third person, except, this book does center around this massive Ponzi scheme. And although every character in the book is fictional, that is, of course, based on Bernie Madoff's crime, the scheme that imploded in December of 2008. And what drew me to that crime was actually his staff. So, at the time that Madoff was arrested, when, the economy was in chaos, he was arrested, but he didn't go down alone. About 6 of his staffers were arrested too. And it became clear that maintaining this massive crime over decades had really been a team effort. Somebody's got to format the fake account statements and wire the money back and forth. And at the time, I was working as an administrative assistant in a cancer research lab at the Rockefeller University. I really liked my coworkers. And what I found myself thinking about was just the camaraderie that you have in any group of colleagues. You're showing up at work for this shared mission. How much more intense is that when you're showing up at work on Monday to perpetuate a massive crime together? That's your Monday morning routine. It's kind of insane to think about. So as I thought about that group, I I decided it might be kind of interesting to try the collective first person.
Yeah.
And that was kind of an interesting way for me to think about questions of collective guilt and kind of collective delusion. You know, a lot has been written about the power of the mob, in the sense that if you're part of a group of people doing something wrong, you know, you'll do things in a mob that you would never do individually. So the first chapter from the office chorus, you know, as I call them in this book, the first line is, "We had crossed a line."
Yeah.
And I think, you know, I think it's easier psychologically to say we crossed a line than I crossed a line. So yeah, that was a really fun voice to write in. It's the first time I've tried it.
It's fantastic, and it moves, those chapters move with such speed, if that makes sense. You're seeing all of it, and it's wonderful. I'm keeping my eye on the clock, as I know Andy would want me to do. So I was going to ask you about dance and choreographing stories, but I'm going to skip to this question. The glass hotel is filled with agile escapes into and out of existing worlds. And so I wonder if you could read pages 34 and 35 and talk about some of the wealthiest characters in your novel really want when they escape the modern world.
Okay, sure. So to set this up, although I don't know that it needs a ton of setup, it's pretty self-explanatory at the beginning. But this is a chapter in which you're introduced to the hotel that's in the title, which is, you know what? I don't even need to introduce it. This is the introductory part. Okay, I'm going to jump right in. Walter is the night manager at the hotel. The property's in the middle of nowhere, Walter's general manager had told him at their first meeting in Toronto 3 years ago. But that's precisely the point. This first meeting was in a coffee shop by the lake. The coffee shop actually built on the pier, boats bobbing nearby. Raphael, the general manager, lived on the property of the Hotel Cayette, along with almost everyone else who worked there, but had come to Toronto to attend a hospitality conference and poach talent from other hotels. The Hotel Cayette was a glass and cedar palace at twilight, lights reflected on water, the shadows of the forest closing in. Walter was studying the ad campaign photos that Raphael had slid across the table. "What you said earlier," Walter said, "about it not being accessible by car?" He felt that he must have misunderstood something in the initial presentation. "I mean exactly that," Raphael said. "Access to the hotel is by boat. There are no roads in and out. Are you somewhat familiar with the geography of the region?" Somewhat, Walter lied. He had never been that far west. His impression of British Columbia was akin to a series of postcards, whales leaping out of blue water, green shorelines, boats. Here, Raphael was shuffling through papers. Take a look at this map. The property was represented as a white star on an inlet at the north end of Vancouver Island. The inlet nearly broke the island in half. "It's wilderness up there," Raphael said. "But let me tell you a secret about wilderness." "Please do." Very few people who go to the wilderness actually want to experience the wilderness. Almost no one. Raphael leaned back in his chair with a little smile, presumably hoping that Walter might ask what he meant. But Walter waited him out. "At least, not the people who stay in five-star hotels," Raphael said. "Our guests in Cayette want to come to the wilderness, but they don't want to be in the wilderness. They just want to look at it, ideally through the window of a luxury hotel. They want to be wilderness adjacent. The point here," he touched the white star with one finger, and Walter admired his manicure, "is extraordinary luxury in an unexpected setting. There's an element of surrealism to it, frankly. It's a 5-star experience in a place where your cell phone doesn't work." "How do you bring in guests and supplies?" Walter was having some difficulty grasping the appeal of the place. It was undeniably beautiful, but geographically inconvenient, and he wasn't sure why your average executive would want to vacation in a cellular dead zone. "On a speedboat," Raphael said. "It's 15 minutes from the town of Grace Harbor." "I see. Aside from the undeniable natural beauty," Walter said, trying a different tack, "would you say there's a distinguishing factor that sets this hotel apart from similar properties?" "I was hoping you'd ask me that," Raphael said. "The answer is yes. There's a sense of being outside of time and space." Outside of a figure of speech, but it's not far off. Raphael loved the hotel. Walter could see that. "The truth of the matter is," he said, there's a certain demographic that will pay a great deal of money to escape temporarily from the modern world.
In the interviews that I've read with you, you talked about your Station 11 tour, the hotels that you've gone to, the many of them, hotels sort of being the idealized version. But your characters in this story, or many of them, are wealthy, and they want to escape the modern world. How do you define the modern world? What is it that we want to escape from?
I think that what we long for is more quiet, more space around us and just a sense of uncluttered peace.
Yeah.
And, something I find myself thinking about is how we seek out experiences that block us off from these technologies, which we paid an enormous amount of money for, the alerts that come in our expensive phones, and the things that we need to do for our jobs and our expensive computers. So we invest in the modern world because we have to. That's, our jobs require it. But we really, really value the opposite of that. We'll pay a lot of money as a species to go stay in a resort where our cell phone doesn't work. Or, as I was reading that section right now, just then, I was thinking about this software that I've been using for years called Freedom, which is a subscription program. I don't remember what it costs. It's like $10 a month or something, but you do have to pay for it. And it turns off the internet. And, we, as a household, that we pay a lot of money for high-speed internet, but we also pay money to turn it off because, like everybody else, we're desperate for a little peace and quiet to get, to have peace and quiet, I guess. So it's kind of an interesting paradox there with our technology that on the one hand, it's wonderful. We're able to do stuff like this. And I don't know when I'm going to get to fly to British Columbia and see my family again, but I've been FaceTiming with my mom almost every day, and that's been really wonderful. So there are things I love about it, but yeah, we do seem to long for quiet. And, this is a whole other topic, but I think that's a big part of the appeal of post-apocalyptic fiction. This is something that came up a lot on my Station 11 tour was, I think there might be a certain longing for a post-technological world.
Yes. And there's so much I want to follow up with on that. And I'm looking again at the time, which we had hours. We do have hours now in this real world, but not according to Andy's clock. We love you, Andy. I think that I'm going to just ask you two more questions is how I'm going to do this. There's a line in the book towards the end where Leon, who is a character we met in Station 11, is talking about being anchored to the earth. And I love this. For me, it was written with such tenderness, and it made me think of all that we learn as parents and how being a parent changes us and teaches us something about books. Your child is 4 years old.
Yeah.
I was wondering how being a new parent has changed your idea about what stories must be.
That's an interesting question. I don't know if it's changed my ideas about stories, but I think it's changed I guess what I'm willing to write about or what I would write about. So, I'm so grateful for Station 11. Like, it really profoundly changed my life when that book was successful. I don't think I could have written it as a parent. I gave birth not long after the tour ended. But yeah, just the thought process when you're writing a book in which 99% of the population dies, like that's horrific. I could barely do that before I had a kid. And as a parent, there are just categories of imaginary horror that you just can't even really think about. It's just too much. So I think, I think there are some things that are no longer, or perhaps that's too final, that are not for the moment possible for me to write about. At the same time, it is another aspect of the human experience, which I'm now more qualified to write about, So one of my earlier books, I think it was The Singer's Gun, had a baby in it. And in retrospect, there's no detail there because I had no idea what I was talking about. So yeah, it makes you, the experience of being a parent, I'd say it makes you maybe better qualified to write some things, and completely unable to write other stories.
Then the last question I ask before our audience steps in. You can make an argument that the world's become more bleak, but I feel like we're always living at the end of the world, you recently said in an interview. When have we ever felt like it wasn't going to be a catastrophe? And in this book you write, sanity depends on order. And you also write, do you find yourself secretly hoping that civilization collapses just so something happens? So right now we're all sort of catastrophe dazed. Mm-hmm. And we are also amazed by your anticipatory imagination, Station 11, and here too in the Glass Hotel with economic disruption. How would you say you see the world finally? And does your way of seeing the world bring you a kind of peace?
It might, yeah. I mean, to sort of go first to the contagious elephant in the room, with Station 11.
Which I tried to avoid tonight.
No, I appreciate it, but it's fine. I'm okay with talking about it. Yeah, at first I was like, please don't ask me about Station 11, but it's kind of inevitable at this point. It's okay. With Station 11, the project wasn't really to write about collapse. It was more to write about a society with no technology. That was an interest of mine. But of course, you have to end the world somehow if you're going to do that. So I chose a pandemic. What became clear to me in researching that book, in reading about past pandemics, is that as awful and terrifying as they are, and this is not to minimize them in any way or to minimize our current moment, pandemics are something that happens. What becomes clear when you start doing the research is that epidemiologists talk about pandemics in the same way that seismologists talk about earthquakes, in the sense that nobody in that field is talking about, I wonder if there will ever again be another earthquake. Well, of course there will be. There will always be another earthquake. There will, unfortunately, always be another pandemic. And obviously, our preparedness and our response to that is what determines the difference between survival and catastrophe. So that's just to say, I don't really feel like I anticipated anything with Station 11. I was drawing on pandemics from the past. And then with the Glass Hotel, I really thought I was writing historical fiction. I was, because I was so fascinated by the Bernie Madoff story. And I do find myself returning to the 2008, 2009 economic collapse as a topic, because I remember, I just remember it so vividly and how intense it was. And it was an interesting collapse. So yeah, I thought I was writing historical fiction there. I sure didn't anticipate this.
Well, and it makes us wonder what you're going to write next.
I know, I'm a little scared. A really nice book with unicorns.
I have brought up the questions. And yes, this was a question I'm going to, wow, wait, they keep changing as they go forward. This was a question that I was going to ask. So I love that one of Connor from the audience has asked, could you talk about the ghosts in your new novel? And Connor also wanted to say, I just love your books.
Oh, thank you so much. It's really nice. Yeah, so, as I mentioned way back at the beginning, I don't write from an outline, and that means some kind of unexpected things can happen as I'm writing and figuring out what the story is. So I thought I was just writing this kind of straightforward white-collar crime novel about this Ponzi scheme. But I think I just always wanted to write a ghost story. Yeah. So, I started off writing... just to back up a little bit, I feel like when we use that phrase, ghost story, we tend to be thinking about these sort of quote unquote classical ghosts, the sort of specter wafting down the hallway in the dilapidated Victorian mansion, that kind of thing. So there are definitely a few of those in the Glass Hotel, but it can be interesting to think about different ways of being haunted.
Yeah.
I don't think many of us made it to adulthood without accumulating some regrets, the things that you wish you'd said or wish you hadn't said, or choices you shouldn't have made or, should have made. And isn't that a kind of haunting, when those moments return to you like every so often through the course of your life?
Yeah.
An idea that really interests me is this idea of the counterlife, which there was a Philip Roth novel of that title years ago that I loved. And, you know, in that novel, that was a series of, I want to say like 4 or 5 variations, you know, kind of variations on the same life. It's your counter life. That's your counterfactual life. That's the life you didn't lead. The life where you married somebody else or went to a different school or emigrated instead of staying or vice versa. And it was kind of interesting as an exercise in this book to think, well, what if your life is being haunted by the ghosts of the lives that you didn't lead? Yeah. So, yeah, I was trying to think about different ways of being haunted, kind of as an organizing principle for the book. So, yeah, I feel like in every section, somebody's haunted in a slightly different way. And
very powerfully, when your made-up character is in prison and just thinking of all that, I could have left them, I could have been this.
Yeah.
All of it happens. And of course, Vincent in this book has many very different lives. And so she's living alternative lives, but she's also thinking about. And of course, you bring in some Station 11 characters here, right, and a few little glimpses of Station 11, the what ifs, the what could have beens. And I love that you're expanding the idea of ghosts for us. That's really important.
Thank you.
So Laura Boyce is saying, I saw your joking tweet warning readers not to read Station 11 during the pandemic, but I actually think it has a beautiful message about the role of art in times of crisis. Could you talk about how that theme applies during this pandemic?
Sure. Yeah, you know, my idea in writing Station 11 was that, not to sound too grand about it, but maybe the arts remind us of our humanity, you know, in an absolutely catastrophic scenario. I don't think we're at that point yet with this. But the arts, you know, they're important. Like, stories are important. Different perspectives on different lives are important. And I've always found the arts to be a sustaining force in my life. And, you know, I'd venture to guess that probably anybody taking the time to tune into this conversation might have a similar relationship with books. But yeah, they're just so important to me in a way that I don't even know that I could intelligently articulate. But there is something about being reminded of maybe your own humanity and just like having different points of perspective on the world. So yeah, you know, I've been seeing a lot of tweets. I use Twitter like 10 times now more that I'm in now that I'm quarantined, you know, than I ever did before. It's become really important to me, and I've just seen so much from people who seem to be having a similar relationship to art. That, you know, all of a sudden books are like really important. And yeah, to go back to that tweet for a minute. It's gotten better, but a couple of weeks ago, there were a lot of people on my timeline who seemed kind of mad at me because they'd read a pandemic book during a pandemic. And it was like, no, the jacket copy is pretty clear. Like, I don't feel like I was, you know, holding anything back there. So yeah, I meant that tweet. It was like, guys, stop reading. But I have also heard from people.
Maybe I've written
it. Right. But I have also heard from people who found it heartening, I guess, because it is a hopeful book. So, you know, that's really nice too.
Yeah, there's a lot of beauty in that book.
Thank you.
I am going to keep reading. Okay, let's go with Larry Milliken. The theme of shipping is important here, and it also came up in Station 11. Yeah, that question I bet you love to think about. Why shipping, Emily? Why shipping?
Right. It's always interested me, and it doesn't seem to interest anybody else. You know, I watch interviewers' eyes glaze over when it comes up. I think what interests me about shipping is that, on the one hand, it's an unbelievably vast part of our economy.
Yeah.
You know, there are very few things that are made in the United States where I live. So most of the things on and around me came to me over the water. You know, the curtains, the microphone, really almost everything. So it's this incredibly vast part of our economy. We don't really think about the process by which these things reach us, let alone think of the people who brought them to us. You know, who were the guys who navigated your banana through the Panama Canal? You know, you don't think about that. You just eat the banana. So on the one hand, it's vast. On the other hand, it's weirdly invisible, given its vastness.
Yeah.
And that's, that's partly just for boring reasons having to do with technological advances. That when ships were smaller, they would come into the port, which was part of the city, and the port was part of the life of the city. At this point, the ships are so enormous; they need these immense deep water ports. So, the ship doesn't come into Lower Manhattan; it goes to Port Elizabeth, New Jersey, and it's a little bit out of sight, out of mind. So, yeah, I think it's a combination of vastness and invisibility. Also, the way, shipping, it's this weird kind of liminal territory where the people who work on ships, obviously they're between countries. But I think what a lot of people don't realize is that if a crime happens in international waters, it's not really clear who, if anyone, has responsibility. So it's this weird Wild West in the oceans that's kind of interesting to me too.
There's so many follow-ons that I love. One thing that I read is that you love to write about places you know well, that during your tour you visited prisons, so you had a little bit of sense for your prison scenes here. Here, though, you also really create the interior of the ships, the cooking.
Thank you.
And so I was wondering, has she been on a ship? I
haven't. No, it's really hard to get in a container ship.
And the second thing I want to say about that ship is it's on the water. And so much of this, the Glass Hotel, you get there by water. Vincent's mother, disappearance in water. Vincent at the beginning of the end, water. And so the ship is necessary in that way, sort of this solid thing on this fluid metaphor of yours. Let's see what else. This is from Janice Rothermill. Did you study writing? Where, if so? Tell us about your life and where you live. And then she's thanking you for Station 11 and saying that she just ordered a glass house from an indie through the link. Janice, thank you so much for supporting Emily and the indies.
Thank you.
I love. So go back to that question. Did you study writing, and where, if so?
I didn't. But before I answer that question, I just wanted to return to that indie thing. A lot of independent bookstores all over the country, if you're not aware of this, they're being incredibly creative and keeping their businesses afloat. So, if you have the opportunity and the means to buy books, this might be a really nice time to support them. A lot of them have had to lay off a lot of their staff, but they will still ship books to you. And, this is a moment when if we want them to still exist after this crisis, then they really need us now. So that's my quick plug for independent bookstores. To return to the writing question, I've never studied writing, but I was homeschooled when I was a kid. And one of the really wonderful things about that education was that when you're homeschooled, you really have a lot of time on your hands, or I did anyway. So I was able to spend an incredible amount of time reading when I was a kid and a teenager. I started writing when I was a kid. One of the requirements of the homeschool curriculum that my parents came up with was that I had to write something every day. So that got me in the habit of writing from a really early age, just these little short stories and poems that I never showed to anybody. And I just found it was something I loved. So it was something I kept doing. My first career was actually in dance. So I studied ballet really intensively when I was a kid and a teenager. And then I went to school in Toronto for contemporary dance, to a conservatory program. And I just kind of fell out of love with it, is really the situation. When I got to be about 21, 22, I just had this realization, like, wait a minute, this isn't actually fun anymore. I don't think I want to spend my life doing this. And it was around that time that I started taking writing more seriously and started writing what eventually became my first novel, Last Night in Montreal. So, I do have a lot of friends who did study writing. They went to an MFA program and had mentors. And I think that would be great. That can be great for people, but it's not the only path. I think another way to learn how to write is to read and write a lot.
Virginia Woolf didn't study writing, and
Right.
and it was the lesson of the books she read and how she taught herself to read,
Right.
Is so key. I think when we're not necessarily MFA. Let's see what else we have here.
Sure.
Some of them I'm seeing that Emily, I'm not ignoring any questions, just seeing that Emily has in some ways answered some. Okay, here is from Stu McDonald. He is in Vancouver. He's pre-ordered The Glass Hotel from the indie book here in Kerrisdale. Can't wait to get it. And he's wondering if you've ever considered writing the Dr. 11 graphic novel that Miranda works on in Station 11. He can't wait to get your next book signed whenever you do another event in Vancouver, and he wants you to stay well.
Oh, it's nice. Hope he stays well too. Yeah, I was supposed to do an event in Vancouver. That was one of the cities of my 25 city tour. I did think about doing the graphic novel from Station 11. And at one point years ago, I'd even started writing the graphic novel script for it, like specifying what every page looked like. To be honest, at that time, I was still touring for Station 11. It was during the paperback tour. And it was just like Station 11 overload. It was too much Station 11 in my life. And by that point, I'd started to write The Glass Hotel, and I was more drawn to that. So, I guess I'd say I wouldn't rule it out as a future project. It's one of those projects that I would love to do at some point, but I don't have a clear plan, so it might be never. But yeah, good intentions.
Do you draw, Emily?
No, not at all. I'd have to commission an artist.
You never know. So here from Jake, I saw news a while back that you're writing the pilot for the Glass Hotel TV series. What has the process been like to adapt your work for a different medium? This you also did for Station 11. In fact, you were going back and forth for a while to the West Coast, weren't you, for that? So you've been involved in filmic, and of course you're married to theater. So what is this process, converting something on the page to?
It's been really interesting. And just as a really minor point of correction, I was actually going back and forth to the West Coast for the Glass Hotel. So Station 11, yeah, Station 11's filming, but I have nothing to do with it, which is fine. Yeah. Yeah. It's
about you, and I get confused.
It's okay. Yeah, the Glass Hotel, it's been a really interesting process. One of the things about not having an MFA is that I've never had the workshop experience, so, and I never really had a mentor either in fiction. So I'm just not used to working in any kind of collaborative way. Like by the time my editors see my novels, that's kind of a finished thing that they're trying to improve. They're not with me, walking me through the beginning, trading ideas about chapter 2. It's different. Television's collaborative, and I've had the good fortune of working with a really great TV writer, Semi Chellis, who was on Mad Men for a long time. Mm-hmm. And she has this deep, intuitive sense of how television works and how to structure a series and an episode. So yeah, I was going back and forth to LA to work with her on blocking out the first season and blocking out the pilot. It's been really fun, I have to say. It's a completely different form. So the learning curve was kind of steep in learning how to write a pilot episode. It gave me a new appreciation for why the screen adaptation is always so different from the novel. That as a reader, you see your favorite book adapted to screen, and you get kind of indignant. You're like, no, why is everything different? Well, because television has a completely different set of dramatic requirements. Every scene just has to drive in a way that it doesn't really with fiction. Yeah. So yeah, it gave me a new understanding of that. And I've really enjoyed it. I love writing novels, but after 5 novels, it's kind of fun to do something completely different.
We have 2 more questions that we have. Thank you for that answer. And Stu wants to follow up on Jake's question. And it's what you've been talking about, but the experience of a writer's room. You've just named who else is working on the show, but Stu's interested in what is a writer's room experience.
I haven't really had that experience, to be honest. The writers' rooms that I've done, it's just been the Glass Hotel pilot, and I don't know if you could even call it a room. If you meet with a writer for 2 consecutive mornings in the boardroom of a hotel in West Hollywood, like, I don't know, I feel like that's not the typical writer's room experience. So I can't really speak to that. Yeah, I'm the wrong person to ask, but I think, from what I've heard, I have a lot of friends who do write for TV. it can be heaven or hell depending on who's running it, kind of like any workplace.
Yeah. I think this will be the last question, and this is from David Sockover. And he says, Station 11 and Glass Hotel seem like very different books. What kind of story do you see yourself telling next, and what is currently inspiring you?
I just started a new novel, but I don't want to talk about it yet because it's too early. I've been reading a lot of sci-fi lately, which I've really been enjoying. There's a wonderful collection of sci-fi from China called Broken Stars that I've been reading, translated by Ken Liu. It's fantastic. It's totally different from anything I'd read in a really long time, and the quality is uniformly spectacular. So yeah, I've really been enjoying that lately.
What do you read to your child?
All of the kids' books that I love most. So yeah, lots of Dr. Seuss. There's this illustrator and writer whose work I love. I don't know how to pronounce his last name. Muth or Muth, M-U-T-H. John is his first name. A whole series of books about a giant panda who's into Zen philosophy. So yeah, Winnie the Pooh is also a big deal in our household. She started saying, "Oh, bother," when she's mad, which I kind of love. So.
Great. And I know you want to step in. Do you want me to ask one more question? There you are.
No, I think we're all set. That was a fantastic conversation. Thanks to you, Beth, and thanks to you, Emily, so much for joining us on your book tour, which I know was substantially undercut by current events, shall we say. So I just want to remind all the viewers to go out, or don't go out, stay in, click that button, support these writers and the independent bookstores and buy their books. And you can follow our events on Crowdcast using the icon above. And be sure to visit us online at freelibrary.org/author events to access our video archive, podcasts, and upcoming presentations. Thanks again, Beth. Thank you so much, Emily.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us, everyone. Keep reading and have a good night. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Emily.
Thank you, Beth.